Welcome to the Essential 99 Punctuation Rules for Court Reporters, video number 7, The Period. I'm Ken Wick. Let's get started. So this video will cover the period, which are ebook rules 1 and 2. We're finally starting the rules. Previous videos covered basic grammar, a basic overview of the punctuation and sentence types, but now we're actually into the rules, so this will cover the first 2 rules on the period. Those sections are rule number 1 on statements, commands, and fragments, and rule number 2, common fragments. So rule number 1, use a period to end a statement, command, or fragment. So fragments are basically independent elliptical clauses. It's just a long way to say a fragment. Basically, it's representing, the fragment is representing a independent clause. They are common in responses and objections in court reporting. So let's have an example of a statement. The defendant has an alibi. So this is a full sentence. We actually have a subject and verb. Defendant has. An example of a command. Please speak louder. The verb speak. The subject is understood, and commands the subject you is, or there's an implied subject of you sometimes. Another command. Can you please state and spell your full name? Is a mild command. So, but I'm going to put it under command. You'll see some references distinguish between commands, which maybe use a exclamation mark, and a mild command, which uses a period. But basically, since in court reporting we don't use exclamation points, you use a period for a command and a mild command. So examples of some fragments. Here's an example of an objection by Mrs. Anderson would say, objection, compound and vague. Now this objection is just a fragment. It actually is a single word which stands for an entire sentence, like I have an objection. And compound and vague is a phrase representing something like the question is compound and vague. But here, Mrs. Anderson is just speaking fragments, and these fragments represent complete independent clauses. And in court reporting, before I go to my second example, we punctuate fragments just as if they are complete sentences. So when you see this, you have to treat the fragment just like it is a complete sentence. Another example is Mrs. Anderson could say objection, compound, vague. We'll learn in a later rule that this coordinating conjunction is joining these two words, and you don't use a comma between them. But here, the person is listing the objections separately, so we need to put a period in between them because these probably represent complete sentences. I have an objection. The question is compound. The question is vague. Because it's hard to make a sentence out of. If there's no period in here, you'd have to say, if the person said compound vague, you wouldn't know what they were saying. But no doubt when they said this, they probably had a pause here, and that pause is the representation that this is a separate sentence. Because you can imagine this saying, objection, compound, vague. There's a pause there. Here's an example of a fragmented response. And like I said before, we treat fragments just like they were complete sentences. It could be a question is, where do you work? The answer is Bob's Auto Repair. Now this is a fragment because this does not have a verb. So, but this probably represents the statement like, you know, they ask the question, where do you work? And this fragment of Bob's Auto Repair probably stands for the complete sentence of I work at Bob's Auto Repair. But the person just said Bob's Auto Repair. But since the person said the fragment, which stands for a complete sentence, we punctuate it just like a complete sentence. Rule number 2, common fragments. So there are some fragments that occur so often we want to make sure, or the references actually will say these are use periods after these words because they are common fragments and they want to just point it out to you. So use a period after okay, all right, very well, fine, and strong interjections at the beginning and end of a sentence. So if any one of these appears at the beginning or end of a sentence, you put a period. If it occurs at the beginning of the sentence, you put a period after it. If it occurs at the end of the sentence, you put a period before it. Now the LMEG, or Morson's English Grammar, the difference is that the LMEG only has okay and all right at the beginning of a sentence. So if you want to stick to the LMEG, then you will only use the fragments or the common fragments of okay and all right at the beginning of a sentence. But those rules, but her rules also state that basically fragments are to be punctuated as complete sentences. So it's sort of left to you if you see other ones that punctuate it as a complete sentence, but it specifically points out okay and all right at the beginning of a sentence that you put a period after those. And here's an example. Now it's maybe I should say here that it's the BGGP, or the Bad Grammar Good Punctuation, that actually has all these at the beginning and end of the sentence. So if you were using that, the BGGP, this is basically the rule from there. Because when I look at these are things that represent, these are fragments. So I agree with the BGGP that these are fragments here. So that's why I have this rule, or I stuck with this rule, or stuck with that version. So some examples. Question, all right. What time did you leave? So all right is already, by this rule, is a common fragment. It is a fragment, so we use it, we punctuate it just like a complete sentence. Probably this rule is really meant to avoid you from putting in a comma here, the mistake of putting in a comma. Answer, just continuation of it, is, uses an expletive, I don't recall. So once again, you put a period after a strong interjection at the beginning of a sentence or end of a sentence. Like I said, the mistake would be to put a comma here. You put a period here. Then continuing the example of the person then says the question, person answering the question says, very well. Can you tell me if it was morning, afternoon, or evening? Answer, it was in the afternoon. Okay. So once again, okay is falling at the end of the sentence. We separate it. We put a period before it. So just rule number 2 is just calling your attention to certain words or phrases or interjections are fragments, and they should be punctuated as complete sentences. Do not use a comma. That's it for this video. Please subscribe. If you like the video, please hit like, and please buy the ebook. Thank you.